Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game, Develop, Repeat. In this episode, we're not dissecting one game. We are going in on a few different games to cover the topic of how games teach us. And we're also going to tie that in to something I'm very passionate about and borderline obsessed with, which is how I learn and how I can learn effectively without burning out constantly. And enjoy that process and have it be a long, sustainable process of learning new skills. Because as game developers, we got a lot of skills to learn, so we better have a good methodology for learning them. So we're going to pull from games to learn about how to make games, as usual, I guess. For anybody who's new here, I'm your host, Chris. I'm a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about how games teach us. Let's get to it. It might surprise you to learn that the inspiration for this episode is Vampire Survivors. Of all the games that would inspire me to talk about learning mechanics, you wouldn't think it would be Vampire Survivors because it's a pretty simple game. It's pretty straightforward. Anybody can kind of just pick up and play. We're also going to talk about Soulslikes and League of Legends a bit. But Vampire Survivors is definitely our starting point. And the reason for that is you play it in an unconventional way. When I first played it, I went, oh, you don't control the attacks? But I immediately understood how to play, right? You jump in, completely different gameplay than anything else you played, instantly obvious how you play it. Why? Why does that work? And I know it seems kind of like, well, yeah, of course. Your guy's on the screen, he's firing. Of course you know how to play. He's just going to fire for you. You move around, you don't get hit by enemies, done. That's the point. You instantly notice what is going on in this game. The game makes it super obvious to you. It says, hey, here's what's happening. Your character attacks. You position your character. Go. And then from there, you now understand that. That is the only mechanic you're playing with. And then you level up and you get a new attack. And you immediately see that new attack. Boom. Another new thing. You've learned it immediately. You start upgrading things. You see the change every time you upgrade something. Everything that you as a player adjust is very noticeable. And everything that whoops you is also very noticeable. You got a horde of things moving towards you. Everything is pulling your attention. You're paying attention. You're learning constantly. The game is very easy to pick up, and it has a great flow to it. You learn that game so quickly. I am still impressed at how quickly that game communicates to you exactly how to play it with so little information. There's no tutorial box at the beginning of Vampire Survivors that says, hey, by the way, in this game, you don't attack, you simply move, right? Like you could have had somebody look at it and go, oh, we need to explain this to players. This is a new concept. This is a different angle. Instead, it's just, hey, here you go. Pick up and go. Play the game. Boom, done. Easy, clear. Crystal clear. So this first lesson to take away from Vampire Survivors, and the reason I'm excited about doing this particular episode, is noticing is the core of learning. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the second section. I'm going to talk about some language learning stuff that I've been invested in recently, and even some art learning stuff, but we'll stick to games for the moment. But noticing something is the first step. If you're able to draw your attention to something, if you notice that something is different, if you notice that something is new, if you notice that you have control over something, now you're learning. You're able to learn to build off of that. I would argue that the noticing in and of itself is a huge chunk of the learning. Not even just a foundational point, but you learn by noticing things, and then you remember a little bit, and we'll get into more of this, I suppose, kind of inevitably as I ramble about it during the develop section of the podcast. But let's talk about our second game. More of a genre. We're going to talk about Souls-like games. The combat in Souls-like games is punishing. We all know this. If you think of Dark Souls, you think of Elden Ring, You think of any of these intentionally difficult games. What is it about that? What is it about that makes people go, yeah, this is extremely difficult, but I want to learn how to play it? Compared to League of Legends, extremely difficult, not something that everybody wants to learn how to play. Not that everybody wants to learn how to play Dark Souls, but like you start playing it and it feels compelling to learn how. Whereas when I play League of Legends, it feels like everybody doesn't want, like everything is working against me learning how to play the game. I guess that's how I would put it. Dark Souls games, everything feels like it's pushing me towards learning it. It's like, learn. You can do this. It's going to kick your butt, but you can do it. You can figure it out. League of Legends, it's like, we're not telling you. Good luck. We'll get into that more in a second. So the Dark Souls style, as opposed to Vampire Survivors. Vampire Survivors, everything is crystal clear, but it's not super difficult. So how is it that Dark Souls inspires you to keep learning and tells you what to learn, even though it's really difficult? It sucks your attention into one thing. There's a specific action you take, and if you fail at that action, it is punished aggressively. You will learn the enemy's attack pattern or you will die. You will learn when to dodge or you will die. You will learn when to attack or you will die. And it will be frustrating. And there's a punishment for dying and you don't want that punishment. So you're going to start paying a lot of attention and you are going to start really noticing what is going on with that enemy. Now there's a catch with Dark Souls and Soulslike games. And that catch is you get frustrated, you get in your head, and you start going, how do I do this? I just need to dodge. I just got to dodge at the right time. And then you start dodging too early, you start dodging too late, you're tense, you're in your head, you're thinking about when to dodge, you're not paying attention to when to dodge. You're only thinking about it. You're not actually noticing the timing. You're not noticing anything new about the enemy's attack pattern. You're just going, oh, he's doing the thing I need to dodge. And then you're doing the same thing again, incorrectly, just like before. You're not noticing new things. You're noticing the same thing, reacting to it in the same way and getting really frustrated. Then you sleep on it, and the next day suddenly you're good, right? The next day suddenly you figured it out because you were like, as you were going through this whole process and getting frustrated, you were picking up on stuff and learning how to play. Now, League of Legends. All right. League of Legends has what I'm going to call hidden difficulty, combined with a social element that makes it high stakes in a unrewarding way. And look, I mean, I'm not trying to bash on League of Legends. There's a lot of great stuff about this game, but I think it's such a good example of this concept and such an interesting counterexample that I've got to go in on this a little bit. Let's look at the new player experience for a moment. Somebody loads up League of Legends, they start playing for the first time. What seems like the most important thing? If there's no dialogue box, if there's nothing telling you what to do, it seems like the most important thing is to fight your opponent. You go to the lane, you fight your opponent, right? And then there's like, oh, you use these little minions to help you out a little bit, right? So you kind of pick up on that. You're like, oh, these minions are going to help me. It doesn't immediately seem like the minions are going to completely wreck your face. It's really clear that the tower is going to wreck your face. You don't want to go under the tower. Boom, clear, obvious, done. And then there's just a lot of stuff that's not clear right when you start, right? Because there's a whole meta. There's all this stuff built up around League of Legends. The last thing I would think is I need to pay attention to last hitting minions and buying the correct items, and also the mini map and what other players are doing and how far their lanes are pushed and what enemy abilities exist in the middle lane. Like, these are not things that are obvious. These are things that you only start to learn when you're getting pretty deep in there. And the learning environment is not incredible necessarily because you got, well, we don't need to go into the League of Legends learning environment, I guess. But the design element of it, it is not designed in a way to give you the feedback that you need to learn the game. And what I mean by this is at this point in the game's history. This does not mean that the game's design is fundamentally flawed. This does mean that the current state of the game, it being a competitive game, makes it a very difficult beast to tackle learning, because the stuff you need to know is not the simple, direct, obvious stuff, because everybody's already figured that out and you got to figure it out and catch up, right? Like you can't just be focused on the most obvious stuff, and so the least obvious stuff becomes the most important, because it's kind of a deep game and there's this whole competitive mechanic, and there's so many ways in that game to fool yourself into thinking you know what went wrong when you don't know what went wrong, right? It is a game of creating illusions for yourself. So there's stuff in there that is hard to notice, which makes it hard to learn. There's also the stuff that's easy to notice, fine, whatever, cool, right? And once you know what you're looking for and you start noticing the correct things and noticing these like weird statistical trends in the way that you're playing, then you can start making progress, right? Once you start noticing the bigger picture, or you can start blaming all of your teammates, or both, both can happen, I guess. But this is a game where progress is a function of noticing some much deeper, tucked away mechanics, as compared to Dark Souls, where the moment you make a mistake, and there are some bigger picture things too, sure, but generally speaking, in combat, the instant you make a mistake, you made a mistake, and you know the nature of that mistake because you just got your head bashed in by some giant thing. And then with Vampire Survivors, you made a mistake because you're getting swarmed, and you can kind of tell how big the swarm is and how well you're doing fighting them off and what kind of things you're having issues with, right? Pretty clear. Clear, immediate feedback. Beautiful. Clear, immediate feedback lets the player notice what's going on. Player notices what's going on. Player is able to learn. That is the how of teaching a player, right? That is the how of learning to play a game, I guess. And then, it gets super complicated in certain settings, right? Like League of Legends is such a good example in such an overly complicated way. And I no longer play this game. But and I'm bad at it too, by the way, just for the record, I'm bad at League of Legends. Just in case anybody's listening to this and going, oh, this is probably just some guy who's bad at League of Legends justifying why he's bad. I am bad. I don't care, though. That was a long time ago that I played that game. What I do care about is the manner in which I'm bad. And I'm bad because I fail to notice the big picture. I'm bad because I don't pay attention to where the guy in mid is and what his abilities are. I'm bad because I don't want to learn to last hit minions. It seems really annoying. Right? And like the feedback loop of like trying to last hit and getting hit, and you tried to last hit at the wrong time when this was overextended. It's not an enjoyable feedback loop for me. It is fun, actually, but it's not enjoyable to learn for me. It's a punishing learning environment. Whereas I like a nice, easy learning environment. I like a nice, comfortable learning environment. And I think that if you're making like a single player, small scale experience, for me, I lean towards making a comfortable learning environment, right? But there is joy in a more complicated learning environment. So you can turn these dials any which way you want, right? You can intentionally make it really hard to learn the game. There are games that I love that are so convoluted and difficult to understand. And I'm like, there are games that I want to love so badly, but I just can't figure them out. And I'm just not like willing to experiment and put in the time to figure them out. Cities Skylines is a game that I want to absolutely love, but I just like can't get into it because I always go, yeah, but okay, well, all right, I guess I'm done, right? There's just like too many little things where I'm like, I don't really know how to interact with that or how to make it fun, so whatever, fine, bye. Let's sink our teeth into the really big stuff now. Let's sink our teeth into the stuff that I'm really interested in, which is how do we take these lessons and how do we apply them not just to our own game design, but to our process for learning game design. there is a concept in language learning called comprehensible input, which I want to use for game design, which I think is probably already all over the place, quite frankly. But comprehensible input is what made me start thinking about the topic of this episode, along with vampire survivors. Let me explain it very quickly and very roughly. If I were to take a portrait or a picture, of a house, point at it and say, Krefna, and then look at you, and then point at the house, you might say Krefna back, because you might know that the house is called Krefna in whatever language I'm speaking. That is the core idea. The core idea is if you understand the thing which I am communicating to you, you can learn that method of communication, right? If I point at the thing and I say the word, you understand the word, now you can use the word, at least roughly. In game design, I'm thinking of this as if I give you something you understand, you can learn from it, right? Very, very straightforward. This becomes one of those things where the idea sounds so incredibly obvious as to be trivial and dumb, right? But if I give you something you understand, you can learn from it. Cool. How are we going to use that in game design? There's a lot of level design stuff. You can look at a level and go, oh, I can fall here. What happens if I fall? Or, oh, I can only fall here. It is my only option. Or, oh, I have to jump. If I fall, I die, right? There's all those sorts of concepts. There's icons, there's UI design, there's making something look very clickable. There's making something sound spooky so you want to get away from it. There's all these little emotional dials that we pull. There's all of these tiny things we do to say, hey, that's background, you can't interact with it. That's foreground, you can interact with it. This is comprehensible input, right? It's just making things easy to understand. But learning core mechanics is maybe where this is the most important thing to actually think through. It's very simple if we just glance at it, but if we look at core mechanics of a game, it becomes very important. If you look at RPGs, one of the issues that I have with a lot of RPGs, and I love the genre, I really enjoy RPGs. One of the issues that I run into with JRPGs and RPGs in general is not knowing what the actual gameplay impact of my decisions will be. There are a lot of instances where I make some stat-based decision and I don't see an impact until like 20 hours later when that stat is really high and then it's like, oh, now I see an impact. You don't get that immediate feedback. It is not comprehensible. You look at the stat, there's 100 possible points. You don't know what the difference between 50 and 52 is. You're not going to know what the difference between 50 and 52 is. And if there's a pop-up box explaining it to you, like, fine, that's all well and good. I'm personally invested in making it feel different. Making it so that if you go from 50 to 51, you feel a difference. You know. Instead of the enemies that you were fighting taking 2 hits, now they take 1 hit. Instead of the enemy hitting you and getting you to critical life, now it's not critical life anymore. I want every change to have a significant enough difference that you know that you did something. Balancing that could be pretty tricky. That's what I'm thinking about in terms of game design. I don't know if I'm going to stick to that. That's the concept that's going through my head right now. I want everything you do as a player to have a consequence. And I think that the game genre we can look at where there's not a lot of consequence would be maybe an RPG, you know? Or where the consequence shows up way, way, way later and it's not well foreshadowed. The consequences in RPGs are well foreshadowed. We all know what Constitution is going to do if you don't have any. You're going to die easily, right? But some games aren't balanced for you to die easily, and you go into the game and you never know, is this a game that punishes me for not putting points into this, or is this a game where it doesn't actually matter? So that creates this whole weird meta thing to it. Okay, I'm going down that rabbit hole enough. Let's go down a different rabbit hole that I'm very passionate about. How do we learn skills? I think that maybe this is a me thing. I think a lot of the times when we're learning a new skill, we think about this in terms of game development. Think about this in terms of pixel art. That's mostly the framing I'll use. Sound design, music composition, coding, whatever it is. When we learn a new skill, we go, okay, I need to read a book about this. Okay, I need to have somebody explain to me how this works, and then I can do the things that they said to me, right? They will give me symbols. I will turn that symbol into actuality. I think it's a lot better to decrease the amount of symbolism in that process, right? Let me explain that more clearly. If I am told, in order to make good pixel art, you want a line that does not have any jaggies in it. I go, okay, what are jaggies? Oh, well, you want to make sure that the line moves this way. I'm not good enough at pixel art to explain this in language, but somebody explaining all of that to me versus here is a picture, look at it, get the feeling for what looks good and bad in this picture, and then make your own version of that thing without staring at the picture. Look at it, learn some lessons, notice some things, make something. Notice some things, make something. I just bumped the microphone. Hopefully it wasn't loud. Notice things, make things, right? That's the pattern. And I think, as much as this lesson sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, that noticing stuff is how we learn things, I think we miss it because we get focused on the signposts, which are extremely useful. For the record, it's really useful to have somebody explain to you what jaggies are, because then you're going to notice it more when you're looking at stuff. But you gotta look at stuff, right? You gotta have examples to build off of, right? Learning through examples, learning through what other people are doing. And I recognize that this is like not groundbreaking stuff, but it's important. And I want to give it the weight that it deserves to some extent. So then in learning our own skills, it shouldn't be 80% listening to some guy say how it works and then 20% doing the thing he said. It should be like 20% listening to some guy and like 80% doing the thing, right? I don't know the exact ratios, but my point is there should be a lot more time spent experimenting and paying attention to things than solidifying a concept in your mind that you have not yet experienced. So you may be solidifying the incorrect data. If somebody is telling you all about avoiding jaggies and you don't know what they are, and you've never seen them, and you think you understand what they're saying, but you misheard a word or you messed something up just a little bit and you didn't quite follow it, but you think you did, suddenly you have set into stone and into law for yourself something that is incorrect. It's going to take a while for you to recognize that you've set that into stone because you're ignoring it, because now it's set in stone and you're like, oh, I don't need to worry about that anymore, right? This is why the experimentation half of things is so important to me. Okay. What did I do with this? How did this look practically to me? I was trying to learn pixel art. I looked at some pixel art. I looked at it for a while. I closed my eyes. I tried to see it in my head, and I let go of it, and then I started trying to make something similar. And it was terrible. And then I compared that terrible pixel art back against the one that I was kind of imitating, right? And I did the same thing again. And I don't keep the thing I'm imitating on the screen because then I can just copy and then I don't learn anything. But I look at it, I kind of internalize, and then I make my own thing. Look at it, internalize, make my own thing, compare. Look at it, internalize, make my own thing, compare. I did this for 2 days. I only spent 3.5 hours total. It was about 2 hours a day on this. Huge progress on my pixel art in that one stance, in that one position of the character, right? So I'm making progress there already. I'm going to keep playing with this for sure. So to tie this together, I guess, within a game, we want to teach players how the game works. And in order to do that, the game needs to make sense. And I know I'm stating the obvious here to some extent, but like the game has to make sense pretty immediately. If you touch the stove, your hand burns, right? Or it needs to be very intuitive. Constitution, that's going to make you not die as quickly, right? Strength is for being strong. But even then, when we start relying on symbols, including our own native language, when we start relying on symbols to explain things to the player, we will create misunderstandings. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Think about how many times you've understood what somebody said one way and somebody else has understood it a completely different way. If you haven't run into this, I encourage you to look out for it. You will just completely misunderstand the most fundamental things because it's symbolism, right? Language is symbolic. Everybody's going to have a different interpretation of everything that I have said in this episode, guaranteed. But if you sit down and you look at some pixel art and you start recreating it, you're going to notice things that are interesting to you and you're going to learn from those things. Are you going to learn everything? Are you going to notice everything? No. But you can notice some things and learn some things. And if you're teaching your players through gameplay and you give them problems that have to be solved through gameplay, they're gonna learn or they're gonna stop. And that's a risk you take. If you give them paragraphs, they're gonna skip the paragraphs and then they are going to get frustrated. Some of them, some portion of the population, I should say, is gonna skip the paragraph stuff. They're gonna get frustrated. Because they're going to be like, why didn't you teach me how to do this? Oh, it's not intuitive. That's why. They taught you how, but it's just not intuitive. And rather than make it intuitive, they gave you just a text dump for you to read. It's a whole thing. I have feelings about this. So how not to teach players? Don't just give them a text dump. There are contexts. Okay, we should mention this. There are contexts where teaching the player becomes too complex for you to figure out how to do. There are contexts, there are games like the Victoria series or the Civilization style stuff, 4X games, the Age of Wonders style stuff, where it becomes very hard to teach players everything they need. In that context, I'm always happy when the developer gives me enough to plant my feet and start experimenting, and then when I have a question, there is a button I can click to pull up the freaking 400-page encyclopedia of how to play Warhammer, whatever, right? Fair enough. You don't want to be teaching every single mechanic all the time and just drowning the player in this stuff. It's like, let me get to the game eventually, right? So sometimes you just can't. Some things aren't worth making every player learn. Some things are worth letting players discover somehow. You don't have to make them learn every single thing, right? We don't need every detail of the game handed to you. There's a balance. But this is a tool that I like to think about. I really like to think about how obvious am I making this to the player? How obvious should it be to the player? And for myself, when I'm learning something, how obvious am I making it to myself? What am I trying to learn? And can I actually notice the thing I'm trying to learn about? If I'm watching a tutorial about coding, am I learning how to fix bugs or not? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. If I'm watching a pixel art tutorial, am I learning how to make pixel art or not? Right? Or am I learning how to watch somebody make pixel art? Is this the phase of my development where this is the appropriate material for me to be absorbing? Or am I better off experimenting with the fundamentals that I've already noticed? Am I noticing new things by watching this or not? Is this just me watching somebody read Clifford the Big Red Dog when I'm already fluent in English? And if so, am I learning something from that? Am I studying English or am I studying how to write a children's book? Because depending on what you're focused on, you might still be learning something there. That's my rant. I have a lot of feelings about this. I'm still sorting it out. I have no doubt that in the future I'll look back at some of these ideas and go, I don't totally agree with that. That needs to evolve. That needs to change. But that's the beauty of learning by noticing. If you don't set it in stone, you can keep making progress. And as long as you're still looking for new things, you're not setting it in stone. It's an evolving document, right? It's an evolving understanding of the world or of the skill or of the game or whatever it is. I've gone on long enough about this. Let's bring this thing to a close. Couple of questions for you this week. First one, are there any hidden mechanics in your game? And if so, what is the purpose in hiding them? Why are you hiding them? Are you doing it on purpose? Next question, when do you want a game mechanic to be totally invisible? What would make you go, okay, I don't want anybody interacting with this. I don't want anybody consciously aware of this. I don't want them to learn about this, right? When is that useful for you? And then lastly, the tip for this week is to notice how it is that you learn. Notice how it is that you make progress. What helps you learn quicker? What slows you down? What inspires you to keep learning? What do you do where you're studying and you go, this sucks? And is it efficient? The things that do suck, are they helping a lot? Or is there something that could be helping more? Are they completely shutting you down, or are you working through them, right? How's that working out for you? I think that's important stuff to notice. I think it's helpful stuff to notice, because then you can learn how you learn, which I'm hoping is really useful, because I'm pretty invested in doing that. I'm pretty invested in working on that skill. That is everything that I have for you all this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're here next week. I hope you have a good time. I hope you have a good week. And get out there, make some stuff, and have fun with it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.